We all know of the case of Joanna Lopez. Popping up by what seems like mistake due to how jarring it is, this single sketch appeared after the nightly sign-off of a Chicago news station back in 1989. The low quality of the image of Joanna really adds to the uneasiness that this segment gives off. Her face seems to blend together in a mess of similar color, her head almost floating due to her shirt blending in with the background. Something just seems off about her. This is called the uncanny valley, a term all of us obsessed with all things disturbing and creepy are probably already familiar with. For those who aren't, in summary, it is a sense of unease that comes from things that our brain recognizes as human, but not quite human enough. It's believed this comes from when multiple hominoid species roamed the earth, and it was an evolutionary trait that helped us recognize if something was one of us. It seems to have stuck around, just in case we need to be wary of something trying to pass off as human yet again. Police composite sketches serve to help identify suspects or victims in unresolved cases, the features of the drawn often exaggerated. This is to allow those who see them to have them stuck in their mind as they go about their business. They've proven time and time again to be useful in catching or identifying those sketched out, but unfortunately sometimes the sketches take a venture into that uncanny valley we all are so familiar with. Today I want to take a look at a few of those unsettling sketches and the stories behind them, bringing a light to some cases you may or may not have heard of. Everyone loves a good bit of jewelry to accessorize with. Rings, watches, bracelets, necklaces, the list goes on and on. Paired correctly, they really can bring an outfit together and seriously make the wearer look like royalty. This first sketch really shows how much the wearer loved to accessorize. Now, you may be saying to yourself, this sketch isn't all that disturbing or unnerving. In fact, it actually looks quite nice, and I would agree with you. It's the context behind the sketch that is horrifying. The victim in this sketch was identified as one late Cheryl Bowman of Harris County, Texas. The case surrounding her death is actually one that, unfortunately, there just isn't much information to go on. It seems that it largely went cold for an extremely long time, and she wasn't actually identified until 2005, a whole 16 years after she was found brutally murdered. Before being identified, she was referred to as Red Nails due to, well, the color of her nails at the time her body was discovered. There is one article that was publicly discovered dating back to when her body was discovered, November 26, 1989. Although short, it provides some insight into how and where she was found. A woman's decomposed body was found early Sunday by people searching for aluminum cans near a roadside in far west Houston. The body, face down, was discovered about 7 a.m. in the 11200 block of Clay Road near Addicks Reservoir. The woman was wearing a denim shirt festooned with lace and bead embroidery, faded blue jeans, and white sandals. The cause of death was not known, but Houston police said they believed the woman was killed before being dumped in the remote area. Sources of the sketch were also discovered by means of the Wayback Machine on the Texas Department of Public Safety website in February of 2002. The description of her clothing and jewelry confirms that the person described in the previous article is in fact Cheryl. As to why exactly she was drawn with her hand covering her face and a big bright smile, it's because when she was found, the top half of her head had been completely beaten in to the point that almost nothing was left to recognize. What detectives were able to use as identifying features were only her smile, her painted nails, and the jewelry that adorned her body. Given this context, her victim sketch becomes that much more haunting. My condolences go out to the victim and their family, and I hope that one day justice can be brought upon whoever committed this horrific murder. The tale of our next sketch is one that is deeply disturbing, and I must warn that the details may be upsetting to some. The silver lining to this is that the case was closed in 2019, bringing the person responsible to justice and assisting in bringing some form of closure to the victims involved. I will not be showing the face or mentioning the name of the suspect aside from the sketch, out of respect to those who were victimized by this individual. Back in 1999, the victim and her two friends were walking in Carnbrook, Pennsylvania, when they realized that an individual in a teal car had been driving by them multiple times until eventually the person stopped the car next to the girls. They approached the victim, inquiring about the location of a specific yard sale, when they grabbed her and returned to that same vehicle. The young girl, who I will now mention was only 10 years old at the time, was understandably screaming and trying anything she could to get the attention of anyone who could help her. Cowardly, the assailant pulled a gun on the girl and threatened to shoot her if she would not stop screaming. It was at this point she was stricken with the weapon as well. Eventually, the vehicle stopped and an attempted assault was made on the young child, but was interrupted by a passing vehicle. It was then that the criminal forced the girl to hide on the floor of the vehicle while they made their way across state lines into West Virginia. It was in West Virginia where the assault fully took place, and the victim was eventually driven back to Pennsylvania, where she was left on the side of the road to find help for herself. Luckily, a good Samaritan who was driving by noticed the young girl walking alongside the road and promptly picked the girl up and contacted local authorities. Evidence was found at the scene where the assault took place in West Virginia containing DNA of the suspect, but unfortunately at the time there was no match for anything that was found. The DNA samples were entered into the FBI's CODIS database, where they sat for about 5 years, before being matched to two similar cases that both occurred in 1988 in Maryland. It wasn't until December of 2017 that a match was finally found, however, relating back to the fingerprints taken for a completely unrelated arrest years prior. The diligence of the officers involved in the case ultimately led to the arrest of the criminal almost 20 years later, in which they would be tried for 23 counts, 16 of which are felonies. I will link the news article for those interested in diving deeper into this case themselves. As for the sketch, it speaks for itself, really. It most certainly makes you feel extremely uneasy when looking at it, but it's great to know that the person was identified and brought to justice. Pennsylvania Police Trooper Jeffrey Brock had spent nearly 20 years investigating this case, and due to the relentlessness of not only himself but multiple other investigating bodies, the victims involved in these horrific cases can have some form of closure, knowing that whoever did these brutal acts to them finally have been put where they belong. Having someone break into your home is absolutely one of the worst things that we can imagine happening to us while we are away. Your home is supposed to be a safe space for yourself, somewhere where you can unwind and not be afraid of just relaxing and enjoying the fruits of your hard work and dedication. To have someone come in and violate that, all the while taking items that have great sentimental value alongside their monetary value, is a form of trauma that I can only begin to imagine. This case is one of those, unfortunately, but luckily no one was hurt in the matter. There isn't much information about this case, and from the research I've done, I cannot find any publicly available information on if there were any arrests or further developments with the burglary. Occurring in Palos Park, Illinois, the homeowner was away from their home for a period of about 3 hours, during which the perpetrator had knocked on the door of a neighboring home, asking the owner if they needed any painting done. See, the robber was actually dressed as a crew member of a painting crew, but didn't have any type of identifying logos on their clothing, and they also didn't provide any type of business card or flyers to the neighbor. Now, this is commonly known as a ruse burglary, where someone uses a distraction to seem less suspicious. They often disguise themselves as a worker who does home repairs or home services in one such example, and one that the criminal in this case used to unfortunate success. The neighbor did take note of their physical appearance and provided that information to police. Paired with that, this sketch is what they came up with. It certainly sticks in your mind. This occurred in 2014, and as stated previously, I did not find any resolution online. If anyone may have information regarding this case or similar cases, or knows who the individual might be based on the drawing, I will leave the link to the article about the burglary, in which there is contact information towards the bottom. Our last case is one that is quite prolific to true crime fans, and unfortunately is one that ended in tragedy. You may be familiar with the case of one Zeb Quinn, an American teenager growing up in Asheville, North Carolina in the 1980s and 1990s. He had just recently turned 18, was progressing through his school's ROTC program, and was attending college at his local technical community college. All things seemed to be going positively for the young man, and all that were close to him certainly felt that he had a wonderful future ahead of him. During his time in school, Zeb found himself working at a local Walmart, particularly the electronics department. It was during his time at Walmart that Zeb befriended a certain Robert Jason Owens. The events led to Robert no longer working at Walmart, but him and Zeb continued to stay in contact and would frequent pool halls together. On the evening of January 2nd, 2000, the two men headed on the road after work to go check a car out that Zeb was interested in purchasing. The drive was only 30 minutes or so, and there was no reason to suspect anything would happen during the trip. Supposedly, according to Robert at least, Zeb needed to pull over at one point during the trip to make a phone call, and then proceeded to turn around and not complete the journey after all. That was the last that anyone had seen Zeb alive. It was 2 days later that everyone began to become suspicious. Zeb had not shown up for work, nor had he returned home, and this was extremely out of character for him. His manager at Walmart did, however, receive a phone call from someone claiming to be Zeb, calling out from work. The manager decided to trace the call and found it belonged to a Volvo construction equipment plant, the same one that Robert Jason Owens just so happened to work at. When questioned about this, Robert admitted to making the phone call to Walmart on behalf of Zeb, but refused to elaborate further. Due to lack of any evidence pointing Robert to the crime, investigators were left at a dead end. That was until about 2 weeks after Zeb's disappearance. His car was actually found abandoned in a restaurant parking lot, with the seat pulled really closely to the steering wheel, a discarded jacket, empty bottles, a hotel key, and strangely enough, a puppy located inside the vehicle. The puppy was fine. It ended up being adopted by one of the investigating officers on the case. None of the items in the car belonged to Zeb. There was also a strange symbol drawn on the back of the windshield in orange lipstick, a pair of lips, and 2 exclamation marks, but nothing else. It was then that investigators started to suspect a woman may be involved in the disappearance of Zeb. Through some digging, they discovered that Zeb was involved with one Misty Taylor, a 19-year-old love interest of Zeb. Misty was involved with another man, however, an abusive one at that, by the names of Wesley Smith. On par with an abusive relationship, Wesley had threatened Zeb due to his friendship with Misty. In their search for Misty, investigators came up with a sketch of her. Then, after questioning, they had cleared her of any wrongdoing. There were some other leads with Zeb's Aunt Ina, as his pager had actually pinged at her residence the night of his disappearance. The strange thing with this is that Zeb and his aunt were not close, but again, nothing had come from this lead, and eventually the case had went cold again. It wasn't until 15 years later that a break in the case came about. Zeb's friend, Robert Jason Owens, was found guilty of a triple homicide in a completely unrelated incident. However, in searching Robert's property, investigators unearthed a mountain of evidence stored underneath what was supposed to be a fish pond that Robert began construction on shortly after Zeb was reported missing. These pieces of evidence include shreds of leather and other fabric, hard, unidentified fragments, and an unknown white powder, most likely believed to be some sort of mortar mix. This allowed prosecutors to pursue charges for Zeb's disappearance. Now, Robert was never formally charged with Zeb's murder, but he was charged with accessory after the fact of first-degree murder. According to Robert, all he had to do with the disappearance was luring Zeb into the woods on the illusion of meeting with the love interest, Misty Taylor. In reality, according to Robert, Misty's boyfriend had hired Jason's uncle, Gene Owens, to kill Zeb out of insecure rage. Jason then went on to dismember Zeb and burn his remains, but to this day, no remains of Zeb have ever been found, and the story that Jason has presented to authorities has never been fully proven. If you or anyone you know may have information regarding this case or the location of Zeb, I will link an article with contact information in the description of this video. My heart goes out to Zeb and his family. I can only imagine what they have had to deal with, but I'm glad that they may have some closure with the recent developments of this case. Being afraid of things that aren't familiar to us may have kept us alive as we got to the point of dominating the planet, but now it just serves as a reminder that things aren't always what they seem. From robots to dolls, all things uncanny will probably forever bring a sense of uneasiness to us. There's somewhat of a thrill in feeling that feeling, but of course I say that from the safety of behind a screen. Hopefully you only feel the uncanny feeling when you're behind a screen too. Hopefully you don't get that feeling when you're out somewhere alone. Stay low key and have a great night.